Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
There's no division between inner and outer, but sometimes it's wise to close the door. So instead of my planned talk, let's explore that. There's actually a lot there, right? There's a lot there. Maybe I'll weave that into what I had prepared. So in the morning, maybe 2 or 3 days ago in the morning, remember that? Was it a long time ago? I explored really the sense of developing wisdom, if we use that word, in our practice, insight, clear seeing, and looked at what that means traditionally, ways to develop it in our practice. And at the end, I pointed to some of the continuity with the opening of the heart, that practicing and exploring impermanence and dukkha as reactivity, as well as aspects of the self, particularly the what I've called the thick self, might be a better word. It's a little bit, if we say, oh, there is my thick self again, very easy for that to be a little bit judgmental, or a lot, right? Yeah, I'm so thick. Right? But we looked at that and saw that there's a natural opening of the heart when we're in connection with what's painful or difficult. And it happens in very simple mindfulness, basic mindfulness, where with knee pain in a simple, direct way, we hang out with it, and it might open us up to just a sense of, if we're not being reactive, to the sense of the vulnerability of having a body, or the fact that others may have similar pain or worse pain, very naturally. I think we know that from our practice, that being present with what's difficult or painful, or even just the fact of impermanence, which in itself isn't painful, right? Just being attentive to that can open us up to understanding, which brings some compassion. And there are ways that we can also, of course, develop kindness and the open heart as distinct practices. And interestingly, it's interesting that by and large, the practices are distinct and somewhat separate. Here we do mindfulness practice, here we look at impermanence and dukkha and so forth. Okay, over here, and then here we do heart practices, so to speak. We do loving kindness or compassion or joy or forgiveness and so forth. So it's interesting that they are developed somewhat separately. And so what I want to explore this evening, and again, maybe half an hour talk, something like that, and then open it up to our discussion, is how we do, in general, practice to open the heart, the challenges of that, and then after we've done that, how do we integrate wisdom and the open heart, right? How do those become integrated as opposed to separate? Or now I'm being wise, but I don't really have so much of an open heart. Now I have a really open heart, but I'm not very wise. Anyone know that one? Right. So we can, what are the challenges of integration? There are a lot of challenges. They're in our culture, in a culture which tends to distinguish the mind and the emotions, and has done so for a few thousand years, right? And where, kind of the prevalent gender conditioning is that men don't really develop kind hearts necessarily. We can look at that because we probably, each of us have worked with that conditioning probably for a long time, right? Right. And I love that ritual from last night because in a way it's really, I experienced it as just being there with one's being, and it was, very heart opening, right? And it's a beautiful practice in that way. So that's really so central here. So we have all these amazing practices to develop the kind heart, develop compassion. And it's been interesting to be associated with the Spirit Rock Metta retreat, loving kindness retreat, for over 20 years, like probably since 2001 or so. And I was mentored by Sylvia Boorstein to teach metta. It's interesting for me personally because my own conditioning was to be kind of a thinker and a problem solver, right? And I knew there was a deep emotional nature because in high school I would cry during driver ed movies. Anyone else have that experience? I did. I knew there was something there, but it didn't come out so much, right? And my identity was as a thinker, and I would be a problem solver, probably conditioning much like many of us. And someone asked me how I was feeling, and I would give them some thoughts, right? And I remember my first experiences practicing metta did not suggest that I would one day co-teach metta retreats, right? That they were, it didn't seem to work well, and I said, okay, maybe it's for other people, and so forth. And also, when I was first practicing, maybe like some of you have experienced, it wasn't actually taught very much. It was taught as something we did right at the end of retreats. Anyone remember that? Yeah, just at the end of retreats, we would do some kind of expansive metta and then bye. But it wasn't taught as a regular practice, I think, until Sharon Salzberg went to Burma and studied how metta was taught in Burma and brought it back and started offering retreats. And Sylvia Boorstein studied with Sharon and then started bringing in retreats at Spirit Rock around 2000 or so. And I started being associated with it right away, and I didn't particularly have a strong background in metta. It was interesting. But I started doing week-long retreats and then teaching them, and it came, right? Because, of course, probably like many of you, probably after college, I wanted to develop more of an open heart and manifest it. And so, various sorts of things, psychological work and other things could, open that up starting at that time. And so we have this amazing set of practices, which I wouldn't have known at the beginning, but I think they're somewhat unique among the world religions, right? Every world religion, or most world religions, have aspirations, and say at the center of what we do is we lead to love, or we lead to kindness, right? And they're, passages we can find from different traditions, and maybe I'll read one or two of them. Let's see if I can find this. This is interesting. This is from the Talmud, the Jewish tradition. The highest form of wisdom is kindness. Whoa. It's probably from 2,000 years ago, right? And from the mystical Jewish text called the Zohar, from the Kabbalah. The world, it's quoting from the Psalms, the world shall be built on love. By this the world endures. Again, I think that's from, about 1,000 years ago. And then probably a familiar one, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs, it does not delight in evil but rejoices with the truth, it always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres, love never fails, from the Christian tradition. And from the Islamic tradition, Mr. Rumi. Love is the water of life. Drink it down with heart and soul. Right? And so we have that. But interestingly, I've been told by people from Christian and Jewish traditions who come to our January metta retreat that there's nothing in our tradition like metta practice. The deliberate, methodical practice to open the heart. Of course, they're kind, loving, wonderful people, but they come to our retreats because there's nothing quite like it. That was a surprise to me. I remember talking with one Christian nun, and I asked her, is there anything like this? And, we were in a one-on-one, just talking about practice, and she said, not really. Well, there are the ejaculations. I wasn't quite sure what to say. But I think I stayed quiet for a while. But I think those are practices where one just, maybe some of you know better. They're practices where one just says, "Oh, the Lord is wonderful," right? And just comes out with a statement, like out of spontaneity. I think that's what they are. I didn't research ejaculations. So I found that interesting, and there are these beautiful, sets of practices done in different ways. I think we know that the metta, loving kindness, again, the etymology of the word metta, probably many of you know, is linked with words meaning friendship. It's I have a colleague, Anushka Fernandopoula, says metta is what? Warm, expansive friendliness. And we train in it, and we work, and I think I talked with Richard, and we thought to have our session at 7:30 tomorrow morning, have a metta session. I'll talk a little bit about it, and probably many or most of us are familiar, but for those not familiar, we'll have a little bit of instruction, not too much. And, so we work in different ways to develop kindness. We have the prevalent way comes from Burma, comes from the way that Sharon Salzberg learned it from Burmese teachers, the repetition of phrases internally over and over again. How many have practiced that way? It's a beautiful, effective way of practicing. And we repeat phrases like, maybe in relation to another person, may you be happy, may you be safe, may you be healthy or as healthy as possible, may your life unfold with ease. And we give the freedom for people to use phrases which are evocative for them, not to necessarily use those ones I mentioned. Those are more conventional, to do something to do with happiness and safety and health and what's called ease of well-being, which means more like equanimity. May I have ease with whatever happens. And we do 1-week retreats where people repeat those, as many of you know, all day long, including in meals and so forth, and informal time. And it opens up the heart, and it's a form of concentration practice. So, of course, one of the challenges when people practice like that initially is just the usual one of distraction, and people develop more stability. And as people work, they also find, some people just find that the heart doesn't open, and and there are all these gender dimensions to it. I've been with that retreat for 22 years in January. Uniformly, we have 80 to 85% women every year. Registration completely open. Anyone can do it. And we've noticed some of the younger, I think the last 2 years, the percentage gone down to only 75% women. And there's more younger men in their 20s and 30s. I think, do you sense some shifts happening? People who know, have contact. I sense some happening. And, and of the men who come, they usually fall in 2 categories. One is those who actually have really good access to their kind hearts and are ardent practitioners. And the other half is people who want that, but it's hard to contact, maybe from all the conditioning, such as what I mentioned in my own case. And it's very poignant to work with them, right? To just encourage them, but it takes time, right? But the practices work. So there's this challenge of sometimes just finding a difficulty of opening the heart when we work in this way, and then another challenge of the practice is that metta practice, more than mindfulness practice, has the dimension of what we sometimes call purification. In other words, stuff comes up a little more intensely, right? People have more intense dreams. Old traumas come up. People's stuff comes up more readily. And so there's a lot going on, and people think they're doing the practice wrong. And people come to me in the morning and say, last night I dreamt I was an axe murderer. Does this mean I shouldn't be doing metta? And I tell, you're right on schedule. Right. It's actually very poignant. People, family stuff comes up from childhood and so forth. And the metta, like I say, tends to bring that out. It's very, it's very powerful. But people have to work with what comes up, and so, but people persevere, and there's kind of a cleansing of the heart, more openness, working with that material, and they can come to really bring the heart more fully into into the daily flow, have the heart more available. There's also the form of practice called radiating metta. How many have had some exposure to radiating metta? Yeah. Generally, that seems closer to how the Buddha taught. There are these passages where the Buddha, you can see it. Some of you probably know the Metta Sutta, the discourse on loving kindness, the main text. Probably many of us know that. I think where there are lines where it goes like radiating kindness over the entire world, upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, right? And there are other passages where the Buddha says, let your metta radiate out 16 leagues to the east, 16 leagues to the west, to the north, to the south, right? And becoming, ultimately, the practice is becoming ultimately boundless, right? And in Tibetan tradition, metta would be called one of the immeasurables. It goes towards boundlessness, and it actually is an access route to that pure awareness that we've talked about a few times, or the sense of the non-dual, that one can approach that in with the radiating metta coming out from the heart. Maybe should we do that tomorrow? Okay. I wasn't planning to, but okay. We'll do it right before breakfast, right? Yeah. And so there are these beautiful forms of practice, and then we know that the Buddha taught metta as part of a set of 4 practices that bring out different dimensions of the kind heart. Loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. These are in Tibetan tradition, they'd be called the 4 immeasurables, called the Brahma Vihara in the Pali. Vihara is just the word that means home or house. So the translation is usually the abodes of Brahma. Brahma is the king of the gods. So it's said that when we're practicing these, we are as gods and goddesses. Okay, we'll do that tomorrow morning. And the practices are very similar for cultivating compassion and what's called sympathetic joy in the joy of others, and equanimity. It's a 4th practice. I'll come back to equanimity because that is a bridge really for connecting the heart practices and wisdom. Right? I'll come back to that. Let's see where I am. So maybe I can go right to that right now. So we have these amazing practices, and one of the aspects of the teachings starts to connect with this question of how do we connect wisdom and the kind heart? Because again, we typically do metta practice separately. We do wisdom practice separately. We can see how the wisdom practices open up the kind heart in different ways. We can also sometimes see how metta or another heart practice starts to open us up to wisdom. We need, just in doing the practice, we have to come back from being distracted. We come back from all the places the minds are. There's a certain amount of mindfulness gets integrated, but there's still somewhat distinct practices, and they can be, they don't necessarily get explicitly integrated. And again, it can sometimes reinforce those cultural or social divisions between the emotions and the mind or the thoughts, and kind of echo some of the conditioning, like the conditioning I described that I had. to primarily, I'll be a thought person, right, and so forth. So the integration is crucial. And there are also ways that it parallels a personal integration of our clarity, our clear thinking with our emotions and our hearts, right? Which is, I think, crucial in the world right now, and crucial maybe even from an evolutionary perspective, to be whole beings, to have all these parts of ourselves available. And so this aspiration to integrate them, I think we can see in some of the teachings. It's sometimes said that the whole of the Dharma is like a bird with two wings. One wing is wisdom, and one wing is compassion, right? They have to be connected, right? And I like very much what I learned from a student of mine, originally from Vietnam, who had left Vietnam around 1980. He was a senior student, is a senior student of Thich Nhat Hanh. His name is monk. He's a monk. His monk name is Venerable Minduk, but he also goes by his lay name because he used to teach at San Jose City College, and there he goes by the Vietnamese name Thanh Nguyen. Nguyen, some of you know, Nguyen. It's the equivalent in Vietnam of Smith, right? Very, very common. And he worked with me when I was teaching in graduate school, and he did his dissertation on the history of socially engaged Buddhism in Vietnam for the last 1,000 years. And I got to learn about it and share it, and he brought me down into the Vietnamese community in San Jose, which was really a rich experience. And he said, well, some of the young people, they won't listen to me, but they'll listen to you about Buddhism. Anyway, I won't go into those dynamics, but kind of, one thing he told me was that in the 1930s, when the Vietnamese were still, as it were, occupied by France, right? It's still a French colony, believe it or not, he said that the Vietnamese modified the teachings about wisdom and compassion. And they said, we don't just need wisdom and compassion, we also need courage. And I've often thought, this maybe can relate to what we'll look at tomorrow morning, that courage is like the body of the bird. And it's the body that acts in the world, right? And so it relates, I think, that's how I like to interpret it. Acting, courage, and so forth, even though, interesting. And so, but this tradition of seeing these two as one whole, or I think there's also a Tibetan teaching which says that the deepest teachings are of the unity of emptiness and compassion. It's a well-known Tibetan teaching. That I think Padmasambhava, says, I teach spaciousness, which is as big as the sky. I teach kind of a vision of awareness as big as the sky. That's referring to that pure awareness. And I teach conduct or action as fine-tuned as a barley seed. Right? And that's the compassion and action, right? And he's, and so they're there. So how do we bring them together? And we could explore this longer, but I'll talk about equanimity as one of the ways we do this, that particularly equanimity as one of the four Brahmavihara, one of the four heart qualities. It's particularly the one which brings in the wisdom, and I think integrates the wisdom with the heart. So I'll end with a little bit of exploration of equanimity, because it's a wonderful quality, that, and just to have that, to have balance, to have the ability to be with a wide variety of experiences, keep perspective, keep balance, and so forth, and still respond. And it really points to also a way that there are two very interesting teachings that come with the Brahmavihara, these four heart qualities. One of them is, and probably you've heard particularly the first one, that each of the heart qualities has what's called a near enemy. It's a way that it can be out of balance unless it's addressed, right? That loving kindness, the kind of the near enemy. There's a far enemy. The far enemy of loving kindness is hatred. The near enemy is something like grasping and attachment for what one loves, right? There's still some love there, but it's, like in the earlier teaching, it's mixed up with reactivity, right? And compassion, the near enemy, is said to be pity, right? There's a distancing from the person. There's still some compassion, but it gets mixed up with something distorted. And for joy, the near enemy is basically getting overly attached to the joy. Some different words are used. What?
Exuberance?
It's sometimes translated as exuberance, which I think is, in English, I think that has to be qualified, because exuberance isn't necessarily something negative, right? But this is pointing to something negative. So, I would say some kind of way we get overly identified with, or I'm so joyful, or something like that, or I'm Mr. Joy. And then the near enemy for equanimity is indifference, right? I'm kind of balanced, partly because I'm removed, right? And I don't really care, right? And the solution, is the second teaching, is that all of these four have to be intermixed. That's the beautiful teaching. That's where the wisdom and the heart qualities come together. That loving kindness, compassion, and joy, or a little more of the heart qualities, get mixed with the equanimity. But equanimity isn't simply wisdom. In the terms of the Brahmavihara teaching, there in the Buddhist teachings, I don't want to get too technical here, but there is a teaching about equanimity that's more in the context of mindfulness and wisdom, and then there's equanimity in the context of it being a heart quality, if that makes some sense. As a heart quality, it gets mixed with these other three. It brings in the wisdom dimension. So we have compassion, but we also bring in the equanimity that sees causes and conditions. Equanimity has balance. Equanimity sees causes and conditions. It sees how something became what it is. It has a certain evenness with everything. And I think let me read. I like this evenness. There's one of the expressions of this equanimity, I find, occurs in some Japanese haiku. And so this is Basho, the famous haiku writer from Japan, living in the 17th century, who gives what I interpret as an equanimity haiku, which expresses how he just kind of even and balanced with everything. Fleas, remember haikus are brief, so you have to pay attention. 17 syllables, right? Okay. fleas, lice, the horse pissing near my pillow. That's it. Now why is that an equanimity haiku? Describing something difficult, but I hear non-reactivity. He didn't say, "Oh, I forgot to get the horse a little bit away. I'll remember next time." Is that just the horse pissing near my pillow? Okay. Another equanimity haiku from Isa. I read one of his earlier with that Gary Snyder poem. And this also involves fleas. I haven't researched enough to know whether fleas were really big in Japan, but they're in both of these haikus. I'm sorry it's so small, but please do practice your jumping, fleas of the house. I'm sorry it's so small, the house. I'm sorry it's so small, but please do practice your jumping, fleas of the house. And then another one, also fleas. Now you fleas, you shall go see Matsushima, which is a beautiful place in Japan. In other words, we're off on our trip. Come along, fleas. Okay. Now you fleas, you shall see Matsushima. Off we go. So, equanimity has these amazing qualities of, balance, evenness, a kind of unshakability, right? Can be with everything, and yet connected with the heart. One of the images we use is like a grandfather or grandmother whose heart is wide open, but has seen everything. Right? That's equanimity, right? Wide open, wanting to help, but nothing phases that person. Right? That's equanimity. And that's the and so it's a beautiful expression, particularly as a Brahmavihara, of this unity of wisdom and the open heart. And also because it integrates with the other qualities, where it's not really developed to contend towards that indifference. And the other thing about equanimity, it's not aloof. Equanimity is also responsive. When I worked on that book, The Engaged Spiritual Life, which some of you have read, I interviewed a lot of spiritually grounded social activists, and I found so many of them had equanimity, right? And that they could be balanced with very hard times, and yet their hearts were still there and they were still acting, right? So equanimity has the kind heart, it has the wisdom, it has the action, which I've tended to interpret more through embodiment. So it has all of these dimensions. So let me finish just with two things. Let me see. I want to read something about equanimity. Two things. Let's see if I can find this. Yeah, here it is. This is from Nyanaponika Thera. Some of you probably know his book, The Heart of Buddhist Meditation, one of the early books. He was a German monk who lived in Sri Lanka. A beautiful essay called The Four Sublime States, which is on the Brahmavihara. You can find it online, called The Four Sublime States. Equanimity is the crown and culmination of the four sublime states. That's his word for the Brahmavihara. But this should not be understood to mean that equanimity is the negation of love, compassion, and sympathetic joy, or that it leaves them behind as inferior. Far from that, equanimity includes and pervades them fully, just as they fully pervade perfect equanimity. So it's that unity of the open heart and wisdom. Metta imparts to equanimity its selflessness, its boundless nature, and even its fervor. Compassion guards equanimity from falling into a cold indifference, keeps it from indolent or selfish isolation. Until equanimity has reached perfection, compassion urges it to enter in again and again the needs of the world. Sympathetic joy gives to equanimity the serenity that softens its stern appearance, the smile that persists on the face of the Buddha in spite of his deep knowledge of the suffering of the world, a smile that gives solace and hope, fearlessness and confidence. Equanimity rooted in insight is the guiding and restraining power for the other three Brahmavihara. Equanimity, which means even-mindedness, gives to love an even unchanging firmness and loyalty. It endows it with the great value of patience. Equanimity furnishes compassion with an even, unwavering courage and fearlessness. To the active side of compassion, equanimity is the calm and firm hand led by wisdom, indispensable to those who want to practice the difficult art of helping others. And again, equanimity means patience, the patient devotion to the work of compassion. Equanimity is a perfect, unshakable balance of mind rooted in insight, but it is not dull, heartless, and frigid. Its unshakable nature is not the immovability of a dead cold stone, but the manifestation of the highest strength of the open heart and wisdom. And then I'll just end with a short passage, which is also about the open heart and wisdom. This is from the Hindu sage and teacher Nisargadatta. Some of you know Nisargadatta. Love says, I am everything. Wisdom says, I am nothing. Between the two, my life flows. It goes back to our discussion of the zero or the one, right? Love says, I am everything. Wisdom says, I am nothing. Between the two, my life flows. Yeah, so let's stay in silence for a minute or two. We'll go into our Dharma dialogue. It can be about anything that I just spoke about, or something that's come up just in the retreat, something other than what was directly talked about. That'd be fine also. We have a good chunk of time. We'll see how we do. Yeah, please. Yeah.
At the end when you're talking about equanimity and part of your book and messaging to social activists, what came to mind for me in the Jewish tradition is the parquet abode. That it's not for you to complete the task, but to start it.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if I never thought of it that way. So
That's from. Is that from the? Is that the commentary on the Talmud?
I believe so.
Yeah, from about 2,000 years ago. Yeah, I've heard different translations. It is not for you to complete the path, but it is not to be apart from it or complete the task, something like that.
Just because you can't complete complete it doesn't mean you shouldn't start it. You should.
Yeah, or continue with it. Yeah. And so, that could really reflect. It's that in a way is a statement that integrates wisdom and compassion, right? Because it's the wisdom that can know. I could get frustrated. Oh, we're not gonna complete moving to the perfect society. By 100. Or I guess the years wouldn't be in the Christian framework goes, but let's say we won't complete this in 100 years. So I'm out of here, right? The wisdom says that's problematic, and the compassion keeps on going, right? And they're unified in that statement.
Yeah, it can go both ways too, right?
Yeah.
It's the compassion that's motivating, and it's the wisdom that's saying this is really hard to do. So.
Wisdom gives perspective to keep going. Yeah, I like that. Let me say one more thing and then I'll go. But, one of the qualities I think of equanimity and of wisdom is one can see causes and conditions clearly, and sometimes one knows that it takes a while. I was influenced by going to the Highlander Center in Tennessee. Highlander Center was where Rosa Parks trained in the 1950s, maybe 1954 55, before she refused to get off the bus in 1956, right? It was started in the early 30s by Miles Horton and one other person whose name I forget, who just stayed with it for a little while, modeled after centers, I think, in Denmark. And it was in Tennessee, near, I think, southern Tennessee, right on the border with Mississippi. And was one of the few places in the 30s, 40s, and 50s where blacks and whites could be together. And it was a major training place. Dr. King went there, Rosa Parks went there in the 50s. And 1960, it was burned to the ground, right? And they, within a month or two or three, they rebuilt it. A different place near Knoxville. But I visited there a lot and was very inspired. And the reason I was mentioning it was that Miles Horton, the founder, and there's some beautiful videos of him. They're probably on YouTube. Really inspiring, And later in his life, he collaborated with Paulo Freire, the educator from Brazil. And he titled his autobiography The Long Haul, right? And that long-term perspective. And I was thinking of, people know the name Dr. A.T. Ariyaratne from Sri Lanka, the founder of the Sarvodaya movement, where they set up local community Buddhist-based social action groups, of which I think there are 15,000 of them across Sri Lanka. I know in the tsunami in 2005, they had a more effective response to the tsunami than the government. Right? Community-based. And the reason I was thinking of him was that I don't know if this was in his writing or, I got to know him some and did some interviews with him. And I don't know if it was from his writing or from the interview, but he said, the way I see it, I have a 500-year plan for Sri Lanka. It's been, 500 years since there was colonial intervention. The problems that we have now have their roots over 500 years. I think it'll take 500 years to resolve them. That's how he looked at things. And he laid out, here's what we do the first 20 years, and so forth. It was quite something. So that's something about equanimity as well, that the sense of causes and conditions. Now, I guess that's what Nyanaponika, what Tara was talking about with patience, right? Do you have 500-year patience? Of course, I don't know if we have 500 years with the climate issues, but that's another story.
Sorry, the name again for the Sri Lankan, the 500 years. Miles Horton was here in the United States.
He was.
Was there another name of these?
The doctor.
Yeah. Sri Lanka.
Oh, Dr. Ariratne.
Thanks.
Yeah. Ariratne. Yeah.
Wonderful film about Highlander Center called "You Got to Move."
Yeah.
By Lucy Lassiter.
Yeah. It's very inspiring, and you can still visit there. And I visited there, and they have an amazing video library. I visited there a few times, and just would stay and look at their videos. And these days, probably quite a lot of them are public. But yeah, still going strong. Yeah. So thanks for your patience.
As you stated, we have practices specifically for wisdom cultivation as well as compassion cultivation. But do you have any creative practices or ways to tweak the traditional practice we already have that help with the integration between the two?
How do we bring them together? Are there specific practices? My sense is that they can obviously open to each other in ways I've described. I think we can do it. I think we can innovate maybe in pretty obvious ways, right? And I'm thinking out loud.
Tomorrow after breakfast.
What? I think we're packing a little bit into breakfast, but we don't want to get it too full before breakfast. Okay. That was a joke that came from my father. My father was a punster, and we'd sit around the table, and probably some of you had a father or mother like that. They would sit around the table and Right. So, but I think it's actually it's a wonderful question because it's really inviting creativity, right? And so, if I think out loud right now, how would we do that? One way is to, practice them in succession. I'm thinking out loud. So I often like to have people practice metta, maybe to start a session, and then go into a wisdom practice. So one teacher, Tibetan teacher I studied with, Mingyur Rinpoche, he said, when you practice, when you do two practices in relative proximity to each other, they tend to mingle. Right? And so one way would be to practice metta for 10 or 20 minutes, and then maybe, or compassion, and then look at impermanence. That's one way. I think there'd also be ways, and maybe more what you're pointing to, where they're explicitly connected within the same practice, right? And what would that look like? I think you could probably think out as well as me, and maybe I've done this in the past, I'm not sure I'm remembering, but it could be something like draw attention. I think I probably do this in some of the work I do with transforming the judgmental mind, where we bring in, where we deliberately go into a certain territory, maybe where there's something that's hard or painful. Like, okay, let's go into, a judgment which had some energy in the last week. Maybe let's say a harsh self-judgment. Go into that. Study it with mindfulness, right? And now, see in holding it with mindfulness whether compassion arises. And maybe let's bring in compassion to help hold it, something like that. Another way, again, I'm thinking out loud, but this actually is even getting more at what you're inviting, might be that I do a sequence, a practice, where first I ground in, let's say, metta or compassion, metta or compassion, and then I ground, then I have a period of time where I practice, let's say, mindfulness, let's say where I practice mindfulness, and maybe bring up some challenging experiences, and then I say, okay, now I want you to practice mindfulness that is not separate from compassion, something like that. What does that look like? Again, it's I think we can, even though the language makes it sound like we're glumping things together, my sense is the experience might be a little more integrated, right? Because it's really about, can I have my wisdom and my open heart present at the same time? And we know that we can do that. Anyone of us who's listened to a friend, right, in distress, and many of us here are in the helping professions in different ways. We listen and we can understand causes and conditions, and there's also empathy and compassion, right? And so, again, I'm totally thinking out loud. It may, one of the forms might be a little bit more even in interpersonal relationships, where we're listening to someone's story, and we very naturally bring in both our understanding and empathy and compassion. That sounds, I hadn't had those thoughts before, but that sounds like it's getting closer, doesn't it? Like that it might especially take place in those kind of settings. How does that sound?
I love it. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I think, because empathy and compassion with another, I think, is dependent also on understanding, which could come through understanding causes and conditions, histories, and so forth. Yeah, beautiful question. It's really brought out creativity. Yeah, Richard.
I was exposed to this idea of metta at GBF and various other places. It was always like let's just do a little metta for 5 minutes. And I'm a really pragmatic guy, and I thought, well, that's all great to be wishing that. But the GBF board got together and came up with this idea of GBF cares, where someone could post, that I'm having a knee operation, whatever it is, and they're letting people know this is the situation. People are very reluctant to ask, will you help me? But once you're aware of the problem, I think it's been very successful.
Yeah.
Those people who are interested in stepping up, step up.
Yeah.
And I think it's made a huge difference. And also the idea of taking refuge in the Sangha, to me that's very abstract. It's like, I'm going to bring you some chicken soup. That's much more concrete.
Yeah.
So just...
Yeah, I think that's parallels what I was just suggesting in some ways, that we know the situation, our wisdom, as it were, knows the need, and we can be a natural compassion and in the form of action which arises. Yeah. 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 Please, yeah.
I was also thinking, one of my favorite times to practice is when my heart is really open.
Yeah.
And like when you were talking earlier about crying during a movie or something, I notice when I do that, that's a really rich time to really pay attention to what's happening in my body.
Yeah.
And it's not only the physical reaction, but where the emotion goes, and sort of examining where it came from and what's happened. And to me, when you first started talking about this, I first went to the thing was the heart has the wisdom. I don't see them as being separate. But after you talk, I understand the separation you're talking about. But the wisdom's in the heart.
Yeah.
And in those practices, inherently, in some way, the way I've experienced it in some way.
Yeah, it's sort of more the separation's more in the conditioning.
Right.
Right, and I think that's what when we go to that larger vision of pure awareness, or I think in its maturity, it's also has the quality of love or metta, right? And it's integrated, even though, as I mentioned, some of us may come a little bit more through the doorway of wisdom and others more through the doorway of the heart. But, to me it's an aspiration to have them be both felt and then also embodied. But it's something that, I think you're giving really it's another practice really, which is when, my heart is opened up for whatever reason, let me be with it. And we could even, as part of the process, notice the wisdom as well as the heart energy. Right. And see how they're connected.
Because there's often connection and engagement, and it just seems, and the self dissolves a little bit or something.
Beautiful, yeah.
Well, chitta, right, is also translated as heart or mind.
Chitta.
Chitta,
yeah. Some of the problems are with these translations. The word, even mindfulness isn't good as a translation. Just to be clear. Okay, Donald comes out after you had asked me to be with his teacher. Mindfulness not good.
What you learn on retreat.
What? Yeah. But as a translation, it's problematic, right? Because, as you were pointing out, the word basically in the Pali language and Sanskrit, they don't carve up experience in the same way we do. In the West, probably since Plato, it's basically three parts. It's the more mental, rational, the emotions, and the body. Right? And that's more or less the way it is. Sometimes we go to just mind and body, but it's mostly the three. And whereas in Buddhist tradition, it's two. It's more or less chitta and kaya. Kaya is body, and chitta we would translate as mind and heart, or something like that, mind and emotions. There actually is no word in Pali or Sanskrit which translates as emotion directly, believe it or not. And so there are that sets up a lot of translation issues. And so mindfulness isn't good. It should be mind, heart, body fullness, which I don't think will catch on. But then even chitta, we could translate as mind and heart or thoughts and emotions. But if you look to the actual translations, even I think Bhikkhu Bodhi generally does a really nice job of translation. He's the main, translator of the Buddha's discourses, but he translates chitta as mind. That is not helpful in our context. It's confusing for people, and so every time you see mind in the translation, you have to read in thoughts and emotions, or even comes up like the third foundation of mindfulness. Again, even if you say mindfulness, you're getting into the problems, but mindfulness in relation to chitta is translated as mindfulness of mind. It's going to have a lot of misleading connotations in English. Right? People think, so I don't even go there. I talk about mindfulness of thoughts and emotions, more accurate. So yeah, there are those issues. Yeah, sorry for the scholarly digression.
Right.
Yeah. Please. Hi, Lee.
So I wanted to ask about another tradition oriented towards healing the world and the find around us in daily use, and whether there was an analog in Buddhism, which I think there perhaps is, and I don't know if you happen to be familiar with it. It's called appreciative inquiry.
Called what?
Appreciative inquiry.
I think I have heard of that. I don't think I know it well, but it's it rings a bell.
It's described as looking for what's right.
Oh yeah.
Or what's beneficial rather than what's wrong, and perhaps it relates to generosity. It comes out of David Cooper Ryder at Case Western Reserve, that sort of where it arose, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think I have some acquaintance with it, but the larger point is really, is being, 'cause it's really kind of in the face of what the neuroscientists call the negativity bias, right? That tends to go to the problem, right? Right, and not seeing the positive. So that could be a dimension of wisdom where we, knowing our conditioning, we ask to correct. When we're identifying causes and conditions, look towards the positive as well as the negative, so to speak. Not just focusing on the reactivity, but look for the resources of care and love and so forth. And that could be, that's a way of getting at the integration we're talking about just in looking at the world, right? I mean, the positive are going to be not just the heart qualities, but other qualities as well. I think that's so crucial and so necessary. I mean, I'm just very aware how that's hard for so many activists, right? And I think understandably because of the levels of pain, tend to focus on the problems and the histories and not so much on the possibilities, and it can lead to people being very much negative about even what's possible.
And social media amplifies it.
What?
And perhaps social media amplifies it.
It can amplify it, and I'm giving a lot of attention to Israel-Palestine, and I can see that focus on the negative, particularly where you focus, okay, this is oppression, or this is wrong, or this is horrible, or this is, unacceptable, or whatever. That's important, of course, but I'm in touch with friends in Israel who are Buddhist teachers and also activists, and I hear amazing stories that are, unfortunately, they're a little bit more now like candles in the dark, right? But like one good friend. Even in the last week, is going every day into the West Bank with a number of Israelis and continuing what they've been doing for 10 years, which is helping their Palestinian friends with the olive harvest, even right now, and holding all the pain together in solidarity, right? That is, I would love the newspapers to have that on the front page, right? Yeah, because that's, for me, it's that which is actually hopeful and will actually lead to a true resolution, right? Sharing the pain, solidarity, a vision of peace and collaboration. So.
There's a gorgeous book by Colin McCann called Paragon. I think it's the name, but it's based on the true story of the friendship of a Palestinian and Israeli men, both of whom had daughters killed in violence. And they tour. Anyway, I highly recommend it. Colin McCann is a fabulous writer.
Was that?
McCann.
Yeah.
Paragon.
Yeah. And there have been films based on that work.
Is that true? I didn't know that.
Yeah. And there's an organization called Families of the Bereaved. And they, Palestinian, Israeli, they do collaborative work together, and they made a film about their work, which is quite powerful. And so those are, I'm highlighting those in our world now, because those are, I think that's very much what Lee was pointing to. And it's in terms of quantity, it's small. In terms of importance, it's big.
It's back to the Pirkei Avot. It gets back to the Pirkei Avot.
Yeah.
Each little task
matters. Yeah, my friend uses the metaphor of a candle in the dark and keeping the candle going. And if you'd like, I could share. Maybe we could have an email go out after our retreat, because they are posting accounts of their work and images, and they have they used to use Instagram, but it's a little bit less secure these days, and I think they're using a new social media forum called Signal.
Oh, yeah, that's been around for a while.
Yeah. Which I could not access on my computer. My computer says, "We do not recognize." we won't go there. So anyway,
that would be great if you could send that.
Yeah, we can send out some resources. Maybe like even some people are collecting the names of some of the authors of the quotation, like that one, the beautiful, like Nyanaponikatera, the Four Sublime States. We can send out a list. Some people have been collecting those.
The Four Sublime States?
The Four Sublime States.
Sublime States, okay.
Yeah. Did you say sub-blind?
I misheard.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. We're getting towards our time. How are we doing in terms of the day? How many people are a little tired now? Okay. Yeah. If we don't have any more sharing, we could just sit for 5 minutes and finish. Does that sound good for right now?
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.